to the new youth center, aka my aunt and my uncle's home office. I will leave it a mystery as to whether or not I am wearing shoes right now, but I am super excited to share with you this Sunday morning a story that has really been on my heart as of late. It's a story that, just with everything going on in our lives right now, it's a story that's really been on my mind. And so I'm super excited to share it with you guys, a story of just radical faith and radical faithfulness in God and of blessing and of transformation. And so this story, it happens in the book of Daniel, chapter 3. And it begins with this king, King Nebuchadnezzar. There's about 30,000 letters in his name. I'm very proud of myself for being able to say it. King Nebuchadnezzar, basically he is the king of this nation of Babylon. Babylon is this major empire that takes over the nation of Israel, and this happens after that. And so what this king does in chapter 3 of the book of Daniel is he has this massive idol constructed and built. It's an idol that's like 90 feet tall, and King Nebuchadnezzar makes this law that anybody, he gets all his leaders together, and he tells all his leaders, all the people he's put in charge of stuff, and he tells them and the entire nation of Babylon, hey, this idol, anytime you hear music played, you are to fall to your knees and worship this idol that I've had built. And anybody that doesn't do that, anybody that doesn't follow my law, they'll be thrown into a fiery furnace where they'll die. This guy's not playing around. And so this law is made, and basically these people called the Chaldeans, they tattle on these three Israelite men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These Chaldeans, they tattle on these three guys, and they go to the king and they're like, hey, you remember that law you made? Yeah, well, these three guys, every time people fall to their knees and to worship this idol you've made, whenever people hear music, these three guys don't do it. They refuse. And so the king is furious. He's furious because these are three guys that he's put in charge of stuff. These are three leaders that he has. And he says, bring them in. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they come in and they see the king. And the king basically is like, hey, if this is true, it's not good for you. He says, next time the music happens, you fall to your knees, you worship the idol, and if you don't, I will have you thrown into this fiery furnace. And what he says after that is this. He says, but if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And he says, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? He's like, look, I am so powerful. I am the king of this great nation. Do not stand up against me. Do not question my power. And what these three men do, how they respond, is radical. It's so profound. It says in verse 16 through 18, it says this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king and said to him, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. That right there alone is radical faith. Is a profound amount of courage to stand up to this very powerful king and to say those words. But they go further and they say this. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Basically what they say is, but if our God does not save us, even if our God doesn't save us, we still have faith in him and we will not worship your God. That faith, that courage is radical. It's so profound, it's so strong. And I think a lot of times when we look at examples of faith like this the thing that we do, the thing we go to so many times, so often, is I know I should have faith like this, but this level of faith is so profound. I can't live up to that. And we get stuck in the shame of, I should have that faith. But that is not in God's character. That's not who he is, and that's not what he's saying. This faith is radical, but it is attainable. Not just for these people, but for us too. It's in God's character to say, yeah, look at this faith. Look at the faith that these three men have in me. And he doesn't say, you should have faith like that. He says, you can have faith like that. God comes to us and he says, you can have faith like that. Don't get stuck in the shame. Come to me and I will grow you and I will give you faith like that. I will grow your confidence, boldness in you. So I think it's so important for us to stop in a story like this and to realize that, to know that. Now, as you could probably guess, the king didn't like this too much. Not at all. The king, it says in verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. And in the verses that go after that, it states that he was so mad, he said, take these men, bind them up. He has his best soldiers come in, bind these men up. He says, stoke the fire, make it 7 times hotter than it is right now in this furnace. And he has these 3 men bound and thrown into this furnace. And this furnace is so hot that the men that throw these 3 Israelites in, without even going into the furnace, these soldiers that throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire die. Because the fire is so hot. And then after this, verse 24 comes. This is my favorite part of the chapter. Verse 24 says, then King Nebuchadnezzar, after these men had been thrown into the fire, King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. There's a lot here in these these just couple verses. There's a lot here. But I think one thing that we can see first off is the way that King Nebuchadnezzar describes the 4th man in this fire. He says the 4th looks like the son of the gods. And it doesn't specifically say, it doesn't explicitly say here that is Jesus. But I believe that we can see that this is Jesus in that moment. And regardless of whether it's Jesus or not, I think it's so profound and it speaks so powerfully that the way God rescues these 3 men is he steps into the midst of the fire. This fire that is brutally hot. God not only saves them, but he steps into the midst of their fire and he pulls them out. In this story, it goes on. And the King Nebuchadnezzar, he calls out. He gets close to the entrance of the furnace. And he calls out to these 3 men. And he tells them, come out of there. Come out of the furnace. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they step out of this furnace. And it says here in the Bible that the fire had not, this is in verse 27, the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their head was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Not only does God save these 3 men's life in such a crazy, radical way, he protects them completely. In the midst of a extreme fire, in the midst of extreme circumstances, God completely protects them. Not a single hair on their head is singed. Nebuchadnezzar the king coming to the reality of his power versus the power of these three men's God. He comes to this reality, and he sees the reality of his own power, and he says in verse 28, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." And he tells all of the leaders that he has in his charge, all of his leaders, and he tells the entire nation of Babylon, blessed be these guys' gods. Blessed be these guys' God, the God of Israel. And he says this in the beginning of chapter 4. He says, how great, this is King Nebuchadnezzar, he says, how great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. He's talking about God. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. I think a fair question that we can ask ourselves in this story is, why does God save these three men this way? Why does he choose to do it this way? And I think it's so profound that he steps in the midst of their fire, what that means. I think that we can translate that to our lives so clearly, that in the midst of our challenges, in the midst of the fires of our lives, God not only is near, he steps in the midst of our fire. This Hebrew word, in the midst, it's one Hebrew word, and it has this very intimate meaning to it, and it's closer than close. God steps into the midst of our fires. I think that's one reason. I think another reason is God, we see that through the faithfulness of these three men, God rewards that. But not only does he reward their faithfulness, God blesses not only them, protects them completely, but blesses the entire nation of Babylon. The entire nation of Babylon gets to hear this story, this radical story of faithfulness. The king of Babylon has this come to Jesus moment as he sees the reality of his power against the reality of the God of Israel's power. He has this transformational moment. I think that's so amazing, and I think it speaks to that question of, why does God do it in this way? And I think it can translate. I think oftentimes we look at stories like this and we think, it's a story for a certain time with a specific people. It's an ancient story. This story absolutely applies to us today. As we are going through a really weird and tough time, as people's anxiety levels are high, as their stress levels are high, they don't know what's going on in our world, and how do we deal with it, and what's going to happen as a result of this. Guys, we have the opportunity in this moment to step out in faith. Step out in radical faith and say, I know our God is in the midst of our fires. I know our God is here with us. And that faith is not something that we need to get hooked up on the shame part of it. I hope that we don't get lost in the, I should have faith like this. No, this is a moment in time where we can have faith like this. We can go to God in this moment and say, God, I'm going to be faithful to you. God, meet me in my fire. Meet me in the midst of my fire. And as I'm faithful to you, God, I ask that you bless me and my friends and the people around me. I pray that we have that declaration right now. That out of the midst of all the circumstances going on, that we have the ability to step out in faith and say, God, I have faith that you're going to save us, protect us, and bless us. And I'm so excited for the people that you're going to bring back to you and back to your love and your care that are in my life right now. Because that's what God does. When we step out in faith like that, He is quick to bless not only us, but everyone else in our life as well. It doesn't make this situation any less difficult. It's a tough time right now, but we take that to him. Let's take that to him and step out in faith like these three characters have. Guys, I love you so much. I can't wait to see you guys soon. And I will be back soon again with another devotional video out of the book of Proverbs. Have a good Sunday.